my servant shall act prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. His appearance was marred more than any man, and his figure than the sons of men. According as many were stunned by thee, so shall he splatter many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him, for they which had not been told shall see, and they which had not heard shall consider. Who has believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow before him.
All right. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing today in the book of Isaiah. We're in chapter 52. And, let's see here. We're going to begin with verse 1 again and read it, even though we're practically where we're starting really does begin what I think the next chapter, where I think the next chapter should start. Oh, there we go. That's better. Couldn't hear myself very well. Okay, so let's just see how that works by reading the whole thing. It will only take a little bit. It's not a very long passage. Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion. Put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem. You know, in a way, as I begin to read this, I'm going to put in your mind, this call to awake, put on, the Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, where we were talking a lot about the bride aspect of, like the good woman that you see envisioned in Revelation and throughout prophetic symbolism. There's the evil woman, the and she's typified by things like unfaithfulness, excess. There were a couple of things sliding through my mind that I didn't necessarily want to give to it. But unfaithfulness, excess, sin. And the other one is faithful, holy, etc. The opposite. And that's one vision of Jerusalem. And it's also a vision of the bride. The bride of Christ is New Jerusalem, which is the church, actually. It's Jew and Gentile together as one through Christ, through his sacrifice. Now, just the point of, I don't want to get into deep in the weeds there, but just to put in your mind, when I look at this, it almost seems, because like I said, we're going into chapter 53, it's almost introducing the bride to the bridegroom. Wake up. Because, the salvation of God is at hand, and here he comes. So here we go. Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For henceforth there shall no more come into thee the uncircumcised and the unclean. Shake thyself from the dust, arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For thus saith the Lord, ye have sold yourselves for naught, and ye shall be redeemed without money. For thus saith the Lord, my people went down aforetime into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them without cause. Now therefore, what have I here, saith the Lord, that my people is taken away for naught? They that rule over them make them to howl, saith the Lord, and my name continually every day is blasphemed. Therefore my people shall know my name. Therefore shall they know in that day that I am he that doth speak. Behold, it is I. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, that bringeth good tidings of good, that publisheth salvation, that saith to Zion, thy God reigneth. Thy watchmen shall lift up the voice. With the voice together shall they sing. For they shall see eye to eye when the Lord shall bring again Zion. Break forth into joy, sing together, you waste places of Jerusalem. For the Lord hath comforted his people, he hath redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord hath made bare his holy arm in the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. Depart ye, go ye out from thence, touch no unclean thing, go ye out from the midst of her. Be ye clean that bear the vessels of the Lord. For ye shall not go out with haste, nor go by flight. For the Lord will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your reward. Pronounced it worse than ever. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. As many as were astonied at thee, his visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him. For that which had not been told them they shall see, or shall they see, all right? And that which they had not heard shall they consider. Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong. Because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. I want to read right into that next chapter, because like I said, it's connected directly. Like this. Right here, me in verse 13 is really where the thought begins. But honestly, it goes back even farther. 52 and 53 are connected pretty closely. But if paragraph-wise, so I really want to clear my throat. Let me just mute for a second. Should have had a glass of salt water for breakfast or something. I don't know. All right. So, yeah, I see this whole Zion. There's someone who's coming who's going to preach salvation to Zion and about Zion. And the bridegroom of the bride is the one who actually does that in reality. But it's interesting that the bride would be invoked. It doesn't describe the relationship here precisely. But when we start here at verse 13, behold, my servant shall deal prudently. That's a new character. That the servant is not even exactly in here. Now back further, like I said, he talked about Cyrus and predicting things in the future. I'll show you new things. And like I've told you from the beginning about the second part of Isaiah, there are a lot of cynical Bible critics who will look at it and say, this is obviously written after Cyrus, because how could they know what his name would be? Obviously they wrote this. Look what we found. It's a book about you, Cyrus. You're in here. So it's very easy to be cynical about that. Maybe not for you, dear believer, but for people outside of the circle of faith, it is easy to be cynical about that. And to say, yeah, that's probably just BS, right? And I understand that. That's like I said, I understand that aspect of things. Here's the thing, though. He's obviously not the servant. He's Cyrus, my servant, and then he's also alluded. I felt like the prophet was alluded to as a servant, because prophets and kings are the servants, and the servant is a prophet and a king, because the king is the servant of God in a sense, or he must be. If leaders ought to be and look at themselves as serving God in a sense. And some people, that frightens them. Oh, they think they're doing God. The other option is for them to think they are God. You know what I mean? That's what people don't understand. You have to either serve an ideal, and it's good you know what they serve. What God do they serve? Because a lot of times they feign religion, but it's like, what's their real serve? What do they really serve? Is the God their belly? What is their true service? It's hard to tell sometimes because people hide things. But in this world now, they even declare what they serve. Meaning that there is no longer belief in some people. We don't they don't serve a righteous thing. They don't think they have to uphold righteousness for people. That the purpose, because serving God to me in many ways means, one, you've got to be very attentive to things like truth, and also by implication falsehood. You have to be truth and falsehood are very important. And then going from that, there's a moral responsibility. Because if you know God and you desire to serve Him, you understand the fear of God in the proper context of it, which should be, on some level, like if you're in power and you're able to do things, like when David looked at Bathsheba, he was a man who feared God, but he should have feared God. What would God, when he looked at that woman and lusted, if he properly feared God the way we could, he would say, no, I can't do that. Can't do that. And so political leaders also ought to have some sort of stopgap that would say, like, no, God help me if I should do that. Where they realize it is something forbidden on a level that even if you get away with it, you shouldn't do it because they believe that they won't actually get away with it. I think on some level with that, people ungoverned like that are untrustworthy, in my opinion. Unless they have a long track record of, I guess, being moral, but it's like, because every man, even a man who is moral or believes in God, is capable of totally failing. And we've seen that over and over and over again with people. So, it's like, I get it, but when someone tells me they're untethered and they act untethered, like they don't have some, okay, if you think you can get to a moral, set of rules rationally, I don't care how you get there, as long as it's the right moral set of rules. Like from my perspective, just as far as being able to get along with people in the world. I mean, I do care on a fundamental level, and I think that they're wrong, but I don't care on the level of I don't see that person as threatening to peace. I mean, because they said, because there's evidence for that in the scripture. Like when when Peter meets Cornelius, he had this very anti-Gentile kind of attitude prior to that, and he was, God had shown me that I should call no man common or unclean. That in every nation, those who do righteousness and fear God, because even if you don't think you fear God, if you act like you fear God, that is somewhat significant anyways. As far as someone, that's someone who, when someone does that, I always feel like, that's someone who should have the gospel preached to them. And maybe they don't believe now, but you'd think, you'd be surprised that they couldn't receive it. But only the Lord knows, really, in the end, why people can or can't hear. So, and that comes to this part. Why can't or can't? You think like Paul's just going off and he's just rambling on. I thought that too, but then I realized I came right back around to what I was talking about here, which is that which they had not been told shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. Because people do hear all the time. Because the thing, it's like, have they not heard? Well, their voice went out into all the world. That's what the scripture says. But they were blinded. People are blind. Now, that's in a, it's a sense, well, in the sense that dog puppies are blind. Our eyes are shut, so to speak. Spiritually, we're blind in that sense. It's not that we can't see, it's just we don't see. Not that we can't hear, that we don't hear. We must have the eyes of our understanding open. We must have the ears of our understanding open. Jesus would say, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Because there had to be, not everyone is able to get it. It's only those who have been given that ability. And it's not a question of intellectual power by any means. In fact, it's completely independent of that. Because it is just a sort of, it's just belief. But when you enter into belief, it is not, it's usually because you've seen something, you have had, in some way, God has impacted you, that it opened your eyes to the world as it ought to be. Like when I the Lord impressed upon me, I'm not right with God. I need to get right with God. That's the whole purpose of Christ's sacrifice, is to help us get right with God. Now, just to go over these verses a little more carefully, my servant shall deal prudently, he shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Now again, I'm going to flat out from the beginning, this is Christ. Now, the Jews, as I said, have their interpretation is that this is Jacob as the suffering servant. And, and I was saying the other day, and this is absolutely true, that our suffering, as individuals or collectively, is not sufficient to do the things spoken of in chapter 3. It doesn't relieve you of your sins, and, and it seems very individualized. Because it's like, he hath bore the sin of many. He took upon him of us all. It's like, so where's the collective? The collective is, he is taking the sins of us. And who is us when Isaiah's talking? It's the Jews. He's talking as a Jew, as Israel, of Jacob. And it's a prophecy. I was talking about Cyrus, right? My old people would be cynical about Cyrus. What about this part? This ain't talking about Cyrus. No Jew or anybody ever said this was talking about Cyrus. What happened to Cyrus is the servant. Well, he was kind of, and he's a type of servant, like a type of savior. The type of Christ in the passages about him felt very messianic, as I pointed out when we studied them. And here also, it's taken over completely. And like I said, those other passages where God seems to be talking, and then he starts talking to somebody else who then becomes God, sort of. As far as in the way it's written, it's very jarring. There's no like, but I said. No, well, sometimes there is, but that's because the servant of God speaks. And he speaks often in the voice of Isaiah. And Isaiah, as far as like I said, when I heard about the polished shaft and all that, and his quiver hath he hid me, in some ways, I felt like the one who is writing this from this perspective is the one who somewhat feels this call. As I said, I do. I feel when I hear that passage, all the servant passages, they inspire me. But this one is so strongly Christ, but it would not have been known before Christ, except it was. Right, he says, I tell you, I want you to know it's I that speak. That was an important verse in my mind, because it's like, because God comes himself to bear the sins of many. His servant is more than any other man worthy of the title. King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Messiah, the Anointed One. Every other person's suffering along the way was not enough to pay for their own sin, let alone for the sins of others. And no nation suffered so much that it could cover the sins of who? Like I said, who? If this is about Jacob, the suffering servant, then who's he justifying? Is this not a promise for Israel? Awake, O Zion! Put on thy beautiful garments. Get ready, he's coming. The Messiah is coming. Put on thy beautiful garments. Oh, how wonderful are the feet of him that publisheth peace. Oh, look at, behold my servant. He's such a prudent guy. And all these descriptors of the man that was Christ. And exactly their reaction to him. We did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. Who's we? Is that what the Jews thought of themselves? Maybe they have a better. We've got, as individuals, gone astray, but the collective is still true. That's not true. The remnant is the remnant just the servant. Personally, the remnant to me is Zion. Awake, put on your beautiful garments. All the Zion, his bride, his holy city has to be. She's got a band on her neck. She's got to get that removed. In what position are God's people to redeem themselves? I mean, this is all nonsense. I guess I've always been curious what the Jews say about that, and when I finally found out that they thought it was Jacob as the suffering servant, and now I'm studying it, in detail, it just strikes me as like just interesting and also absolutely unworkable. But like this is the part in the chapter 53 here when it gets into this stuff, and I read it. I'm kind of standing on what I read so far just to make a general comment about it, because we're still back here. Any doubt as to, you understand, there were people who suggested that because of prophecies like Isaiah and Psalm 22, that the Christians had altered the Bible, because at some point they didn't know. Remember, in Europe, they were cut off from the East for to a great extent, let's say, for during the Dark Ages, which people falsely base on Christianity, because the East had Christianity too. There was Coptic Christianity. There was all kinds of Christianity in places. The Dark Ages were unique to Europe. It's a form of Eurocentrism that says Christianity brought on a Dark Age. It is a sort of they always complain, these liberal Eurocentrism, and meaning viewing the world from a European centric point of view. And a lot of people do that, and it's something you should guard against because it does blind you. Because it's like there's a world outside of our little world, folks. There is a whole world outside of our little world. You always got to remember that. And so I say when they talk about Christians never seeing tribulation, through escaping in the rapture, I'm like, just the notion that God wouldn't want us to suffer by any means, that's ridiculous. That's wrong. Here's the thing. Christ is the ultimate form of the suffering servant. Yes, many servants have suffered, and for others. Not always for their own sins, but for the sins of others. I see in this also that picture of innocence. Because this passage, 53, is about innocence in a lot of ways. Because it's the point that he did nothing wrong, but yet he had to go through all these things. You know what I mean? And and it could be like, if you're gonna be look at it from the perspective of Isaiah's world, so many of the people who were carried into captivity were not really guilty, the ones who were guilty of what brought that on the society. It wasn't them. Many poor and other people suffered. And, but the thing is, the whole nation had gone after idolatry. But you figure children and stuff. So in some ways, because there is a certain, but that's what I'm saying, is like there is no one truly innocent. That's what the scripture declares. And the innocence of this person, though sometimes we feel like people are relatively innocent, because people can be relatively innocent. Which means that none of us is perfect, of course, but many of us have never tried heroin. In that regard, of that part of life, you're innocent of it, meaning you're ignorant and you haven't been part of it. Or, many people have never been, I've been to see a prostitute. I've never been to see a prostitute. I'm sort of innocent in that regard. It's like, never been there. There are certain lines I've never murdered anybody, except in my dreams. Where it's usually, I never dream of murdering anyone. I dream that I have murdered somebody for some reason, and I have to deal with their body, which is funny. Well, because it's someone who needed murdering. Usually, it's not like I did some like friend or something. I don't know. It's a weird dream. I'm sure that someone could dip into my psychology there. I think it's from always feeling like there's a lot of things I got to take care of and not, whatever. This isn't my analysis, but whatever. Anyways, so there are lines we don't cross, generally speaking. We have other, we'll tell a lie or do these other things, right? Look at some dirty magazines. I'm not going to go to a prostitute. Okay. Just like in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talked about, you've heard it said, thou shalt not kill, but I say to you, whosoever is angry with his brother. And so there are other gradations of sin that we are guilty. We're still, sinners coming short of the glory of God. And so no one. And he's right, and no one could fulfill what is described here in Isaiah 53 except Jesus. There's no one that could be named. It would have to be a perfect man, because men aren't perfect. And therefore, that's why we understand the servant of God ultimately to be God himself in human form. And then when God's Son comes to earth in human form, sorry, a little indigestion, he would be that servant. He would exemplify everything a good servant should be in serving God. And so one quality is given as prudence here, but the English word prudence is one thing. What about What does it say? Hold on a second, sorry. Sometimes having my brain switch over from talking mode to like manipulating this stuff is sometimes a little bit Okay. Prudently. Prudence is fine. It's a weird word. We don't use it very much. Prudence. I always remember them making fun of President George W. Bush. No, George H.W. Bush, actually, the first Bush. On Saturday Night Live, they used to, wouldn't be prudent, and it was sort of made fun of. Definition, to be prudent, which is, but another word for it would be consider. Where's the, consider, expect, instruct. There's almost no, a primitive root to be or make, act circumspect, hence intelligent. He can act intelligently, he'll be smart. My servant. Alright, so here we go. Prudence, circumspection, considerate. And that was, of course, and so, but we don't have to say, we know Jesus exemplified these things, but these, therefore, are also things we should exemplify. And that he was prudent, we should also be prudent. We should consider things. Like I say often, it's not enough to intend well. We have to take responsibility for the consequences of our actions. It's not just, well, we meant well, so, whatever happens must be good. Sometimes, there are times when you don't look back. You just go and do something and you can't look back because there's no way. But sometimes you have to look back and look over and check over and think over. He should be exalted and extolled and be very high. The one who is that way, and that is a path to exaltation. But he's also promising, of course, that because of his prudence, the implication is God will exalt him and extol him and raise him up. And because it's like, well, they didn't receive him. Exactly. But the point is, as many as were astonished at thee, his visage, because it speaks now of his humiliation, of his bringing, of his being brought to death to the cross. And then so it says, we'll talk a little bit more about verse 14 in a second, but we kind of covered the general of it. So shall he sprinkle many nations. I've never been quite clear on that. We'll talk about that in a second. The king shall shut their mouths at him. The king shall shut... See, they were astonished at him in his humiliation. And I wonder what astonished is exactly. Exalted, rise. You know what's funny? Exalted, okay. You know what exalted means? Well, exalted means to rise, which I thought was funny. That was the quick. To be higher, exalted, to rise. Oh, I didn't bring it up for you. Oh well, but that's, I looked at it real quick and that's what it meant. See? That's all I'm going to do for that. But I was suggesting rise as in resurrection, or rise as in ascend into heaven. But in that he ascended into heaven and rose from the dead, that is very exalted. That is the exaltation I would be speaking of. But also that ultimately at his return, the kings will shut their mouths at him, and every knee shall bow. It refers to that moment, that idea that he would shut their mouths. That is always that is the kind of, because the idea is that before, people's mouths are open. Oh, well, we can't believe what happened to him, So let's look at Astonied. Astonied at thee. I didn't want to just do that, but that's all right. To be desolate or appalled. I wonder what it means. Astounded. The connection of meaning's not clear. Interesting. Awestruck, appalled. Interesting. They do include Isaiah 52:14. Notice that, and this is the lexicon part. They talk about more about the different uses and where they are similar. And here it is, usually of land. When it talks about land, to be awestruck. I didn't look these verses up. But I'm going to assume these are similar. So, it's a contextual thing. So, awestruck would be probably a good translation, or astonished. Because of the spectacle of his crucifixion. And also, well, in a sense of that, I mean, I take the sentiment to be that I'm reading into it Christ, obviously. I'm reading his story into it. But it does, because you want that to fit right. You know, you're like, okay, it sounds mostly like Christ. I want to make sure it all fits in right. So, being astonished at him, the word means desolation because it can also, because it is a form of astonishment, like a object of, you know, they said the connection wasn't clear. But I'm saying speculatively. And also, you know, the things people become awestruck at are often scenes of, you know, let's look at some of those. Actually, I want to go back because I'm curious now. All right, I'm curious. What's Leviticus 26:32 say? What does Jeremiah 2:12 say? And what does Ezekiel 26:16 say? What are they obviously, you know? Oh, great, I got this weird version. It's like the Green's Interlinear. I can still read it. And I will bring desolation to land. The land shall be astonished. You read it right to left. Your enemies who dwell in it, whatever, okay. Okay, and I will bring desolation to the land, and shall be astonished at it, your enemies. Your enemies will be astonished at the desolate land. Interesting? So, there is a land that's desolate, and the enemies are astonished. Be astonished, heavens, at this, and be horribly afraid. Be desolate, says the Lord. So, which is it? Horribly afraid. Oh, gosh, which word is it? Now I'm not clear. Like, be astonished. Oh, the first word. There it is. Yeah. Be astonished. What was the word? That's not the one. There it is. To be astonished, appalled. It's this shamem. All right, whatever. And I guess this is a form. Well, it's a S. It's an S word. So be astonished. Oh yeah, shamem. Sure. Be astonished, heavens, at this, and be horribly afraid. Be desolate. Be very. I guess that doesn't give me a very. But it's probably talking about the destruction that's coming. And this is too much here. Oh, that's a long verse, I guess. Okay. There will be astonished at you, the Shemem. So, and it's a verse saying, and will come down from their thrones all the princes of the sea, and lay aside their robes and garments. Their embroidered take off with trembling. They will clothe themselves on the ground. They will sit and tremble every moment. This is what a real word for word translation sounds like, by the way. And be astonished at you. Again, the word is connected with, like, the astonishment comes at the desolation of something else. So I just wanted to go a long way to prove we are not shoehorning Christ in. You know what I mean? And it may seem to other people like Paul, why are you even worried about that? Like I said, it's like when I was young, I felt myself somewhat vulnerable to a lot. Like I said, there were books about deconstructing the Bible, that I was afraid to read, because I started reading some of them and they troubled me so deeply it shook my faith. And because all my faith was about the Scriptures. Because my faith was my intellectual pursuit in the Scriptures. I did have a sense of prayer in that, but I mean, what I'm saying, I was really focused on that. A lot of my doctrine wasn't right either, and my eyes really weren't. Well, my eyes were open in a sense, but not completely. Or I needed it, whatever. I didn't have the Holy Spirit. And then when He came, that changed everything. It changed everything. And my faith is grounded in the experience I had where He gave me His Spirit. And so I understand why some people are doubters. But also I look at it, and through the lens of faith, I genuinely believe. And it's and I know how to some people these old scriptures and all that different books, it's funny because they talk about stuff about the Bible, they don't get it. They talk about as if it was written by one person, and then complain about how it was written about all these other people. As if certain things are not known. But for some people, I guess, I don't know, ignorance is just it's like a cloak. As long as you wear it, it covers you. As many were astonished at thee. So the astonishment, it is right to consider that a sense of wow. Why? Because his visage was so marred more than any man, and his form than the sons of men. When I was young, that kind of troubled me. He was, I thought of ways people could be marred more. You know what I mean? But what I said the other day, and it's true here too, that God becoming a man was a humongous step down. You know what I mean? So everything He suffers is a greater loss. And also this, I also came to think of it in this way, that this is looking at Christ, because He's speaking to Christ at once about His service in humiliation, but also about His ultimate victory that's embedded in this whole passage, right? Because it says, I will divide him a portion with the great. He shall divide the spoil with the strong. And here it says, he shall be exalted and be very high. People were astonished at you because there was a point where you were desolate and all that. But in the sense of the greatness of the injustice, well, that's another relative consideration, the greatness of the injustice, but also the sense that over time, no one has had more evil spoken of them than Christ. Over time, no one has had their image distorted more than Christ. Over time, no one has had his words perverted more than Christ. Over time, no one has had his visage so marred more than Christ. You know what I mean? The way he is manipulated and marred and all, the humiliation goes on in some ways. Because though he is set down at the right hand of God, he is waiting to receive the kingdom promised and to restore the kingdom to Israel, as Peter asked, wilt thou at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? And Jesus said, it is not for you to know the times or the seasons. He could have said, don't you get it? We're done with that. But he doesn't. He says there's a time for that later on. He is coming to receive his kingdom again. That's a core belief of Christianity. You got to believe he's coming back. When we don't know. But like they say, better look busy. Oh, you'll be busy enough. That's the thing, is people get busy whether they want to or not. Events catch you. When the great whore is formed, people may have been sleeping, but they, pretty soon they're drunken. Pretty soon they're wearing their mark of the beast. Proudly. Proudly. I can see that. So, again, he typified. He was the ultimate form of a suffering servant. Many people suffered. He was betrayed by his friend. Someone who he had walked with, slept with, ate with. I mean, they slept in company together, people. But I mean, a trusted friend. Someone he dipped the sop with. They broke bread together. And Judas betrayed him with a kiss. And all his friends forsook him. You will all leave me alone, he said. All the people who were with him, they all forsook him. Can you imagine everyone forsaking you in your hour of need? When you most could have used a friend, someone to stick up for you. Who stuck up for him? No one. I mean, the people whispered, "Oh, this is an innocent man," but nobody stuck up for him. Hold on a second here. I just keep going. I feel like I'd like to clear my nose, but it's going to be too much trouble. Plus, I can just mouth breathe. I'll be a mouth breather today. As long as it's not running, it's okay, right? So shall he sprinkle many nations. Now, I translate that in my song Splatter. Because, just because I wasn't sure if it was referring to how he would, his blood, the blood of sprinkling, so to speak, of his sacrifice, would be to all nations. Now that's one way of looking at it. But I've always looked at it the other way, which is that it refers to when he returns. Like as they marred his image, he will mar their image, and he will cause the blood to run to the horse's bridle, to the image. I believe, I'm not, this word sprinkle in this chapter, I believe is the same or similar to, I'm just winging it there a little bit, but to what you would see in, I should look up sprinkle right now. Let's do it. All right. Similar to what we would see in chapter 63, where he is clearly coming and splattering blood on their garments. It's explicitly saying that, and their blood shall be sprinkled on my garments. I believe that's the same sprinkle. In fact, we can use the Englishman's Concordance here on the right to find that out real fast. I see sprinkle, though, comes up a lot in Leviticus. I noticed that right away. So there we go. To spit or spirit. Huh. So now that's a sprinkle. Well, that's fine. Strong's exhaustive. I didn't translate that very well. Okay, that's sprinkle, to spurt, spatter, sprinkle. Yeah, to spurt. I remember having someone talking about this in terms of cause them to spurt with joy. I wonder if it's ever used that way in the verb dubious, to spring, leap. Yeah, here, look at it. See, this is one, to use the words as a verb, to leap up upon, hence, according to many, hiphil, imperfect singular, Isaiah 52:12, so shall he cause to leap, that is, in joyful surprise or startle, many nations, but perhaps corrupt. In like sense for, there's some word, they're comparing words like in a way I don't understand how to read a lexicon, okay? Is there a formal training? But many shall tremble. I'm sort of piecing together what it's sort of saying. This is like the way the word is being used. Many shall tremble. Yeah, so it's a little bit strange. Because people are like, so shall he sprinkle many nations, right? And it sort of makes sense, but when you think about it, Jesus doesn't really, like, the blood of sprinkling isn't a national thing. He doesn't sprinkle nations. He does, but, and it's such a strange thing to say, sprinkle nations. Sprinkle on them or sprinkle them? Are they the direct object? Because that's the thing, is that I think that's why they don't like it, why they say cause to leap up. And those are Christian scholars who will say, cause the nations to leap. Because this isn't in the sense of sprinkle over nations. It means literally like sprinkle nations. He'll take nations and sprinkle them. I think that's why they don't like that. Because I don't think it means sprinkle blood on the way it does in like Leviticus. But because even in the lexicon here, on the left, see Brown Driver Briggs, that's the lexicon. The verb definition 1 is to spurt or spatter. And they have here, and here's Isaiah 60. It does occur in Isaiah 63:3. I'm not going to go there right now. And their blood shall be sprinkled on my garments, okay? But it's a violent sprinkling in that case, splatter. Which is why I thought of this, he will splatter many nations. Because you can, if you think about him splattering the nations, like smushing them, like grapes, that makes sense. Quite frankly, as far as a verb. Like, in that case, it's translated perfectly fine. They just chose a bad English word because the English word only gives it in the sense of gentle sprinkling, not in the sense of a violent, like here on the right, like it says Leviticus, splashes blood, sprinkled, splashed. It's not always necessarily where you take your fingers and go sprinkle. I don't know. Here you go, shall sprinkle the priest's finger. That sounds like that, right? Sprinkle with his finger may mean just literally like a drip, but it can mean much more. Yeah, in this one, like her blood was sprinkled on the wall. That was a violent sprinkling. That was, I believe, where Jezebel. No. That's it. I want to go there. He was sprinkled, and here the lifeblood was sprinkled on my garments. That's Isaiah 63. But the way in which on Isaiah 63 it is sprinkled is through violence. Just give me the King James. Yeah, verse 3 of Isaiah 63. I have trodden the winepress alone, and the people there was none with me, for I will tread them in my anger, and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled on my garments. And I will stain on my raiment. So the manner of sprinkling here, though, is not like you take it and you dribble it on his garments. It is, I'm treading the winepress violently, and the blood gets on his garments. So it can have that force of spatter, depending on the context. And notice it says, I don't know about the state of the preposition. I wish I was a better scholar of Hebrew because I could confirm for myself that when it says, so shall he splatter many nations, that it's legit to say, so shall, that means he will splatter the nations. He will cause them to be squashed like grapes. It makes sense with the next part. The king shall shut their mouths. And it's that they were previously astonished at him, but then they will be astonished for their own sake, because their eyes are going to be open. That which they had not been told they shall see. Well, the gospel has been preached, but many will not see it. So I don't know. It could be all good, like in the sense of like sprinkle nation. Like I say, it's not saying he's going to sprinkle over the nations blood of expiation. It's saying he's going to sprinkle nations. Like here we go. Let's get some nations and let's sprinkle them. I believe, unless I'm misreading that, because that seems to be why they say cause to leap with joy. In fact, what did they say at the NIV in the Devil's Trance? People will probably be very offended at them changing that to whatchamacallit. It would be let's see the NIV. Where is the NIV? There we go. Let's see. The many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured. So he will sprinkle many nations. And there's like some sort of little note there. Or so will many nations be amazed at him. See also Septuagint. Oh, I like that, be amazed. That is probably the best. I mean, that would be the best sense, I think. You know why? Because it says, the kings will shut their mouths at him. I talk about that parody that often comes. You have a verse where a thought is expressed twice. You know what I mean? For example, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. That is the doubling of that verse. And the same thing, the next verse, it would make sense for it to be a double of the same thought. It would not be like, oh, he will sprinkle blood of sin redemption on, because there is redemption in the passage, but that's not what's saying here. I guess if they were appalled at his humiliation, now they will also be amazed at his return. And I think that's a good way to look at it. So they will be amazed. He will amaze many nations. They will shut their mouths. Shutting their mouths is a thing of like struck dumb in surprise. So the idea of surprise here is a very good choice, I think. And that's my strongest suspicion, is that is exactly how we should regard this. What is wrong? The mouse over here on this screen made me think it was the real mouse. Okay, all right. So that's good. Now I feel really good about that, because now I understand that. So, amazed. I'm going to have to rework that song. I don't like my version of Isaiah 52 that I recorded in 99. Because it's the sour notes that just drive me nuts. Not the one I've been playing is the live one, which is a little better sung. All right, so shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him, for that which they have not been told they shall see. All right, we'll leave it there. We'll begin Isaiah 53 tomorrow. I think we got a good foundational. It's an important passage, and like I said, when you remember that this comes later, and you consider how closely it all really matches Christ, predicting Cyrus ahead of time is small potatoes. Because Christ was many centuries later from Isaiah. And like I said, in the Middle Ages, or late Middle Ages, whatever. At some point, they thought that because they thought the church had altered the scriptures to make it seem more like Christ was the Messiah, because those were so convincing. Things like Isaiah 53, Psalm 22. But they found that that's not true. One, Isaiah 53 is pretty much the same in the Jewish Bible. I don't think it's different at all. Psalm 22 we got from them, but even then we found out in the Dead Sea Scrolls that had been altered, but the original text sounded more like Christ, meaning it had been altered to make that passage seem like it did not refer to Christ. And I speak of Psalm 22, and they pierced my hands and my feet. Anyways, so that's it for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Thanks for joining me this study. Looking forward to being back again tomorrow. Until then.
Behold, my servant shall act prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. His appearance was marred more than any man, and his figure than the sons of men. According as many were stunned by thee, so shall he splatter many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him, for they which had not been told shall see, and they which had not heard shall consider. Who has believed our report, and to whom